Hi, and welcome to Candidate Spotlight, a production of Arlington Independent Media. I'm your host, Ted Billich, and with me today is Andrew Schneider, a candidate for the Democratic nomination to a county board seat for Arlington County. Andrew, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Well, there's been so much that you've been having to do out on the campaign trail the last couple of weeks, and I know it's only going to get crazier. One of the things that you are, I'm sure, trying to do is to define yourself relative to your opponents. If you had to explain in just a few minutes or a few seconds what it is that makes you different from the many other people vying for these spots, what would you say?
It's interesting because when you run as a Democrat in Arlington, you don't have to do what a lot of Democrats tend to do nationwide, which is try to make themselves appealing to the masses. Not in some ways you see people swing to the left or on the Republican side swing to the right, but then have to come back to the middle. What's great about Arlington is that we have a strong liberal democratic tradition in Arlington. So I would say the differentiations between me and the other 5 candidates are not so much policy, but like we talked about the other night at a debate is leadership experience, overall experience, and their values. And I think in general our values tend to be the same. I'll tell you in terms of my experiences, it starts from when I was a child. I grew up in Arlington. I chose to raise my family in Arlington. I've lived 30 of my 40 years right here in Arlington. So I feel like I've seen how Arlington has grown, how it's changed, and how so many of the things that I think are so special about Arlington have been consistent, whether it's the parks, the schools, our commitment to civil rights, our commitment to the environment. So that makes me feel great about all of the candidates, that I think a lot of us have a lot of the same commitments. But in terms of leadership and experience, I mean, I really feel like in a lot of ways I've done so many things that have made me uniquely qualified for this job. Being the president of the Civic Association for the last 5 years, being on the board of Overley Pool, being active in my kids' schools, being on the board of Community Residences, which was founded in Arlington. You know, these kind of in the trenches community things make me feel very connected to the community. And that makes me feel very, very qualified and special in terms of what I feel like I bring to the table. And in terms of leadership, I think what we've seen in Arlington the last few years is that there's been a hankering for the voters to know that their voice is being heard. And so I've really predicated my entire race on making sure that I'm a good listener. And I think that I do have the unique skills to be that listener. And finally, I'll say that the theme of my campaign, which I really have based the entire race on, is one Arlington, one community, to be inclusive of all corners of Arlington, not just geographically, but in terms of issues, where the constituency groups, to make sure that we're inclusive of everyone in Arlington. And I think that's another thing that has been lacking in Arlington the last few years, and that there's been a little bit too much pitting against one community against another. So those are the things that when I look about why I want to vote for me, are the things that I bring to the table. But like I said, I mean, we have a great group of candidates. We have people who've done a lot of different things, but when I go to bed every night and think, why am I the right person, those are the things that run through my head.
I'm interested to hear you say that in terms of policy, you don't see yourself as very far apart from your opponents. Do you think that Arlington voters, not just Democratic voters, but Arlington voters want change in policy? And if so, how would you bring those changes in policy?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I think that the number one thing that people want, and it's hard to say because what I'm constantly doing out there is learning every day. I knock on doors every single day, and I learn something new every time I knock on doors. And what my job as a leader is to distill all that into what's the right policy for the county, based on what I'm hearing from the community, based on what the right policy is, what is possible. And I would say that the number one thing that people are asking for is an attitudinal shift, a clear direction and vision articulated by the county, an understanding that the fiscal reality of Arlington has changed, that I hear a lot of people talking about, hey, don't short shrift the schools, spend on schools, don't forget about affordable housing. But then in the same breath they'll say, or in the next breath they'll say, no more stupid spending, no more glamour projects, no more gold-plated this or gold-plated that. So I think that it's not as much of a shift in the policies, but how we articulate them and our focus. And you know, what I've based my campaign on is making sure that the partnership with the school and the school board continue to be great, that we're spending money wisely in our schools. Right now, our budget on the schools is over $500 million. So I'm very concerned and focused on making sure that money is spent wisely. But at the same time that we continue to grow our economy. There's only 3 options that Arlington has, and only one of them is appealing. One, we can raise taxes. And taxes continue to go up every year just because of our property values go up, but even actually raising them higher by raising the tax rate. 2, we can cut services. We live in a great community, and part of the reason why it's great is because we haven't cut services. We've continued to expand what the community provides for each other, whether it's great public safety, schools, parks, whatever your focus is in general. Arlington has made an investment in that part of the community. Or the third thing is to grow the economy, and to me that's the only way that we can move forward. So when I talk to people, those are the things that I'm focused on. And I'll tell you, Ted, the other thing that I talk about is making sure that it's easy to do business with the community. I talk to business owners and voters every day. And there is this concern that it's become harder to interact with the county, that there is and I don't know if it's being out of touch or just not having a sense of how difficult it is sometimes to get things done in the business, in the community, whether you're starting a business or filling a pothole or just routine things. So.
Well, on your website,
Sure.
and I know on the Stump, you talk about streamlining business processes.
Sure.
Give me some examples of some things that Arlington hasn't been doing that it could do differently to make it easier to do business here.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've talked to I talked to a business owner the other day who said he started doing business here in the 1980s, and that when he started doing business in the 80s, Arlington was the easiest jurisdiction to do business with. And now it's more difficult to do business in Arlington than it is to do it in Prince William County, PG County, or Washington, D.C. And I think what he meant was that in terms of the number of people that you need to get approval from, both internally in the county's office, where there are multiple zoning offices, multiple permitting offices, whether it's for environmental or for zoning, et cetera, and then having to go out and working with the commissions and making sure you're getting the approval from the commissions, it becomes very onerous. I had a business owner who told me last week that they started a business, they have 2 full-time jobs, and they started a business because they saw a need not being met in the community. They didn't need to start the business. They saw that there was a need that was not being met in Arlington, in their community. They said if they could do it again, they would have started the business in Falls Church. And so, to me, but it's not me necessarily knowing what all those solutions are. It's me going to the business community and to the individuals and saying, what would have made this process easier? And also going and saying to the other local jurisdictions, why is PG County now doing it better than Arlington? What is the district doing that is better than Arlington? I know business owners that say, we get called every day by Falls Church that say, come look at this site. We can get you in and out of here in 6 months. We can have shovels in the ground in 6 months. I had another business owner say, when we went to our attorney, they said it was going to take us 2 years and $200,000 to get through the permitting process. In the end, it was 5 years and $1 million.
So what would be some changes that you
Right.
would push
So-
for directly on the board?
So here's 2 examples, okay, Ted? The first thing, I think that there should be a one-stop shop, that you could go in and say, office of, whatever you want to call it, and whether that's run through AED or whether it's run through the existing permitting office in the county, it's not as important to me as that you would go to one person. It's kind of like having a case manager. You know, even if you look at the healthcare system today, that you see a lot of healthcare being moved into a case management system where one person is responsible for helping you get through the system instead of it's on you. Many businesses now are hiring expediters or attorneys to filter them through the system. That's unacceptable to me, that we're going to have to ask businesses to incur those extra costs. So that's the second thing. That's the first thing. The second thing is to make sure that we're working and that we're focusing with our existing team, our existing staff, to make sure that we have a customer-first attitude. And it's hard because a lot of the offices in the county are understaffed or resource constrained, but we need to make sure that their attitude is, how can I make this easy for the customer? So some of it's training, some of it's leadership, some of it's just making sure that they have the resources they need to do their job.
I asked you to differentiate yourself from your opponents. What about the incumbents? How would you be different from Ms. Hines and Mr. Tejada, who are retiring and having these seats become available?
Well, I think Arlington owes a great deal to both Walter and to Mary. They've served their community collectively about 30 years, 20 years for Mary and about 12 years, I believe, for Walter, 11 years. And they've overseen a lot of change in Arlington. I think with anyone in any role, what is great about bringing new people in is that you get a new perspective, a new vantage point. And honestly, the challenges that are facing Arlington now are not the challenges that were facing Arlington when they came into office. Now, I think the things that they have, there are two, I can speak about each of them individually. Mary has a reputation for doing her homework, knowing the issues, listening to various constituencies, and helping bridge consensus. Walter has a great reputation for speaking for folks in our community that don't always have a voice. His advocacy for affordable housing, his advocacy for folks throughout the community, especially our newly arrived Arlingtonians. These are things that I hope to emulate. There are a lot of things that I hope to emulate. That said, I'm looking forward. When I win, we're going to have Jay Fassett and John Weistat there on the board, and then my other new colleague. I'm looking forward to, as somebody said, the most important thing you need to do as a county board member is know how to count to 3. That's what I'm looking to do. Is I'm looking to build consensus. And honestly, the one thing that I'll say, Ted, and that's happened in the last few years, is that Arlington has always had a reputation for being apolitical, being focused on doing the right thing. Yes, from a progressive or liberal vantage point, but really putting politics aside. And I think that the concern that I hear from a lot of people is that's become too political, that what I talk about in my literature and on the stump is the sandbox politics. You know, I'm going to be against this because somebody else is for it, or I'm going to be for it because somebody else is against it. We pay too high of taxes. We have too high of standards for our leaders. I want to make sure that all 5 of us are working collaboratively to make sure that we can address the challenges that Arlington's facing.
One of the things that Arlington has touted for a long time is the so-called Arlington Way, the idea of bringing people into the process, not just elected officials, but citizens into the process, so that better decisions are made. Is the Arlington Way broken?
You know, I got some press early in the campaign for saying that the Arlington Way is broken, and or being implied that I was saying that the Arlington Way was broken. In my understanding, what the Arlington Way is, it's this collaborative process where you seek input from a lot of different constituencies. So if you're putting up a new business or building a new development, you're hearing from the neighborhood, you're hearing from housing advocates, you're hearing from county staff, you're hearing from whatever special interest it might have a vested interest, where maybe it's close to a bike path, so you want to make sure you get the perspective of the bike people or the parks people. What happened is that it became not just a attitude, it became a process. And I think it's in some ways become such a heavy and laborious process that, well, if it's not broken, it's become onerous, and it's become this perception that anybody can step in at any point and slow something down, can seek change. You know, there was a project recently on Columbia Pike that was adhered to by the form-based code, which was meant to, in some ways, streamline the Arlington Way. But even at the last minute, there was people saying, oh no, you need to make this accommodation, you need to make this modification. And that really troubles me, because when you ask people to play by certain rules and then think that you can use the Arlington Way to modify those rules or to seek out a perspective that is different than what has been set forth as the plan or as the process, that seems to me that you're kind of changing the rules. And that doesn't, people want no surprises. They want to know what the rules are. And I think that's been troublesome. And I think, before we just move on, I'll say that the other thing that the Arlington Way has done for some people, well, 2 things. A, it makes it very protracted. So then it allows it to become a very emotional process. If I'm investing hundreds of hours or weeks, years, months, and it doesn't go my way, then it starts to feel very sour for those people. And then the second thing is, which you hear from some people, and I don't think this happens often, but there's almost this kind of false inclusion. Oh yes, we met with you, so we've checked that box, but really nothing changed that meeting. And so there's perception that I'm not really able to influence. I'll give you a small example. You know, I was at a meeting recently, and it turns out that the board had made a decision prior to the meeting in which 30 people came and spoke against the decision. So all those people came and said, my voice matters, I want to speak, but really the decision had already been made. And to me, either there should have been a sense that we've made our decision, we're glad that you came, you feel free to keep speaking, but we've already made our decision, you really can't influence us. Or commit to not making your decision until you've heard from all voices. But to me, it's a little specious to say both.
One example that I've heard the business community hold up as a problem area in Arlington is the Planning Commission. That the planning process is protracted and painfully expensive.
Right.
Two of your opponents have long tenures on the Planning Commission. Do you share the view that the Planning Commission needs to modify its process? And if so, how, as a board member, would you deal with that?
That's a great question. I think that there's two parts to that question from my perspective as a potential leader on the county board. Is that A, how do we look at the entire commission structure in Arlington? And then B, how do we look at the Planning Commission? Because I think the first part of what I perceive your question to be is the commission structure in Arlington. We've created these citizen commissions to allow folks to educate themselves and then help direct county policy. To me, as a member of two commissions, that relationship between the county board, the commissions, and the areas that they oversee is somewhat muddied. What role do I have as a commissioner? What role do I have on policy? What is the board asking of me, and what are they going to do with that, with the recommendations or the work that I do as a commissioner? It varies very much based on the chairman or chairwoman of the commission and the actual commission. Now, the Planning Commission is unique, A, because it has statutory backing through the Virginia legislature, Virginia code, and B, because of the impact that it has on actual development in Arlington. Now, there's one perspective that we could say, well, the Planning Commission is the vanguard between Arlington being just like every other community, and that the Planning Commission has done great things to make sure that Arlington is as beautiful, as sustainable, as environmentally forward-thinking, as is inclusive. I mean, we all know that the Clarington model and the RB corridor, which was built in large part through the partnership with the Planning Commission, is held up as a national, if not international, example. That said, there's other people, which I think there is credence to, and this kind of gets to your question, Ted, is that it's become overly onerous. That one commissioner, what business owners will say to me, so I go to one meeting and there's 4 commissioners there and they say the bike rack should be here. So then they'll go back to their architect, incur thousands of dollars of expenses, move the bike rack to the other side of the door or to the other part of the property. They'll come to the next planning meeting and say, oh, well, we did what you asked. We've moved the bike rack to this part of the property. And there are 4 different commissioners there and said, oh, no, we don't like the bike rack there. This is a real example. I think when commissioners, commissions and commissioners have that kind of ability to influence something, and it goes to what I said earlier about this increasing uncertainty, increasing cost, it makes the cost of doing business higher. But one last thing is that maybe at one point Arlington could incur that because the demand and the uniqueness of Arlington was so great. Yes, it's harder to do business in Arlington, but your return on investment is going to be greater. But as we all know, that the economic pressures on Arlington have changed. The federal government's changed. The Silver Line's come. There's Washington, D.C. is revitalizing. So you can't just play by the same rules. So I think that the commission system in Arlington has to have a very tough look at it. So,
as a board member,
Sure.
What would you want to do in terms of that relook at the commission structure?
Yep. One of the things that my competitors, Katie Crystal's talked about, is making sure that we look at who is on these commissions. And I think that's a good step, make sure that as many different voices on these commissions. So for me, on the planning commissioner, why we might not have developers on it, it might make sense to have business owners on it, not just folks who are from the planning or the architecture community, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing goes back to leadership, which I talked about. What are our expectations for the commission? And as a leader, as a member of the county board, I am not an implementer of policy. I am a setter of policy. So if I'm able to give clear direction both to the county manager, to the commissioners, not just the chairman, but to the overall commissions, I think that would be a great start. And I think that the way that it's set up now is that there's liaisons between different county board members to different commissions, and that's fine. But I also feel like that we have to have an overall strategy about what is the input that we want from these commissions. Because just saying that we have these commissions, there's over 550 commissioners in Arlington. I've looked at them. I have a list of them, okay? They're all great Arlingtonians who are committed to their community. But there's 210,000 Arlingtonians. And so at some level, just because you've raised your hand, just because you're interested in this, I'm not exactly sure that the way that we have it, that these commissions being able to have undue influence on the business community and on the future planning of the community is, it gives me pause. I'll just leave it at that. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that Arlington
Sure.
has faced over the last couple of years is a new awareness of constraints.
Right.
We saw it in the last budget cycle and even in the previous budget cycle. Is there anything we're spending too much money on that we could cut back on right now, Andrew?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's a great question, Ted, because I get a lot of people ask me about spending. And, you know, I've looked at the numbers. We've increased our tax revenue over the last 10 years by about 80%. We've increased our budget, the overall budget, by about 55%, excuse me. Our school population's increased about 30%. So, yes, we've increased spending more dramatically than our population has grown, more dramatically than our school population has grown. And we've been able to do that because our tax revenues increased so much. Where are we spending too much? It's hard at this point, just like at anything, it's hard to make cuts overnight without having them feel very egregious and very painful. You know, we've cut on things which we haven't returned to spending on since the Great Recession, such as parkland acquisition. We've zeroed that out since 2011, and we are not spending any money on parkland acquisition since I think 2011, 2012. So in some areas, we're not spending enough money. I think what I do have concerns about, when you have a $1.1 billion budget, which we have here in Arlington, and about half of that money is going to schools, and you know that the school spending is going to continue to increase, is making sure that we're spending that money wisely. What concerns me is that, now, do we have a first-class transportation system in the region? Yes. Do we have a first-class commitment to transportation solutions in Arlington? Yes. But maybe we're not in an economic environment where we can spend $1 million to $500,000 for a transit stop. Now, it's a tough thing because if you talk to people on the Pike and you say, okay, well, we want to make sure that we have a first-rate transportation system so people can, that this makes us a desirable place to live and work and do business, fine. But maybe not everything. Just like the aquatic center. Here's what I talk about with the aquatic center. Should there be a swimming pool in that part of the county? Yes. Does that swimming pool need a lazy river and an auditorium component to that? Probably not. We have three. I grew up swimming at W&L and Yorktown and Wakefield. We have three very adequate swimming pools in Arlington. As James Landers talked about, maybe you put the next swimming pool cohabitated with the career center. Not everything has to be to the nth degree. And so that's one area that I think we have to look at our spending. The other thing is, Ted, is that I knocked on doors the other day, and the guy works for the Arlington County Public Schools. He said, you know what, if the county would just let us piggyback on some of their IT services, we could save $2 million a year. I don't know if he's right. I'd have to go back and actually look at the numbers and look at what the programs that he's talking about. But the fact that there's somebody on the county staff that thinks he has the capacity to save $2 million a year, and we're not taking advantage of those kind of synergies, that troubles me.
Let me, we only have a couple of minutes left, and so I wanted you to imagine with me that you've now been on the board for 10 or 15 years.
Okay, sure.
And you've decided it's time to move on. What would you want your signature accomplishment to have been during that time?
You know, I've spent so much time focused on getting to June 9th and getting to November and getting elected and knowing that I have a learning curve as a first-term member. But I'll tell you what my legacy is. I grew up in Arlington. I know what a great place this is. I know why I brought my children here. I want my children to have the exact same choices that I had. We are one of the highest concentrations of millennials in the country, if not the highest. If we don't do something to make housing affordable for them and find a place for their students to go to school, that legacy withers. Those young people, they leave. Maybe they leave for Brooklyn, maybe they leave for New York, maybe they leave for the West Coast, maybe they leave for Loudoun County, but they don't have the opportunity to stay in Arlington, which means that our intellectual heft, what makes Arlington so special, it withers. So then we become like a lot of other communities in the country. Not bad, good schools, good businesses, but there's something so special about Arlington. And I want to make sure that if we can adjust, you know, The federal government is changing its relationship with the county. This is unique in our lifetimes. My father was a 40-year federal government employee. He retired in December. They're not filling his job. Arlington is no longer a company town. What we are is an intellectual powerhouse that has to respond to this new economy. And if we can find a way to do that, while at the same time growing our school population over the next 7 to 10 years, while at the same time having increased competition regionally, then, and if we are still, my goal is to make sure that Arlington is still a great place to live, to work, and raise a family. And if we can do those things, that is a legacy that I will stand proudly behind.
Andrew Schneider, it's been a wonderful conversation today. Thank you very much for joining us for the Candidate Spotlight. This has been a production of Arlington Independent Media. This Candidate Spotlight has been hosted by me, Ted Billich. Until next time, good day.